I ended up on Coastal Command on Halifax's on a long-range meteorological squadron. There were about 5 operating in the country, and I was posted to 519 Squadron at Lucas in Scotland. And the object of the exercise was we carried a very rare aircrew member called a Met Observer, who wore a harp wing with M in it. And we would go out for about 9-10 hour flight, covering about nearly 2,000 miles. The Met Observer would be taking readings all the time, and myself and the other wireless operator, we carried two wireless operators, would get the message to send back to base from the Met Observer, and immediately all this information would go back to base. Now that was going on in 4 other different places dotted around the UK, and this was getting near the end of the war then. So we as a crew went over to Aldergrove in Northern Ireland to 518 Squadron, and the squadron badge, now it's disbanded of course, was a key with a fist holding it, and underneath the motto, "We hold the key." The story behind that is, you may well have heard that D-Day was put off 24 hours due to weather, and it was 518 Squadron in Aldergrove flying out in the Atlantic that sent that information back, which delayed D-Day for 24 hours.
I looked at the man in front of me and he landed about up to his knees in water, so I went straight out and I landed in a shallow or a crater of some kind, and I looked up. I was completely immersed in water, and the ramp of the craft was above me, so I couldn't get out. And I whipped all my equipment off. I was carrying 3 mortar bombs, and apart from a hundredweight of equipment that I normally carried it, and I tried to get out again, and suddenly a hand came down, grabbed me by the hair, and it was Harry. Harry was a German Jew, and he was in the 10th Inter-Allied Commando. He was from X-Troop. Church had named the troop with the Germans in as X-Troop. There were about 80 or so Germans, but very good men. All Jews, some Russian Jews, from various countries, but mainly German. So Harry pulled me out, and I got no equipment, of course. I went up the beach like a rocket with Harry Herman, actually his name was, Harry beside me, and there were 200 on the beach from an infantry regiment that landed in front of us. Our job wasn't to take the beach, it was to march into the bridge, the Pegasus Bridge, to help the airborne. I'll just tell you one more little story. At Salonelles in France, the fighting was very fierce, and were in individual slit trenches in the garden of this house, which was the front line then. And Harry Herman, the German, was studying his trench about the end of that carpet off me. And he had the mortar bomb coming and got down. He never got down. He was stood up to here in his trench. And it got between us. All the muck from the earth around him got blown into his body, and he was in a bad state. And we had a pact between us that if one of us was to sustain bad injuries, there was no helicopters to fetch us in then, you know. We had to go to the beach and wait for a boat and die on the beach. And we had a pact between us that we would kill each other with morphine, which we had in our escape pack. A little toothpaste tube like that. And so we put him on the top of a jeep which held two stretchers back to front. And he wasn't quiet, he was suffering. I gave him his morphine, I gave him my morphine, and I gave him another fellow's morphine that would definitely not need it. And I said, I thought that anything I could do for him. And he suddenly became all quiet on the stretcher. And I had a bar of chocolate in my escape pack. Dark chocolate was supposed to contain vitamins, and I took that bar of chocolate underneath him. I said, "There, Harry, I'll see you again, mate." And I took him away. It must have been 45 years later that I went to the cemetery at Roundville to have a look for him. And I knelt down and said, "Harry, I hope you had that chocolate." But he didn't answer me. But it was a shame. I reckon he took it with him anyway.
Were there many air raids over Mablethorpe?
There were quite a few, yeah, because I think there were quite a few of these German planes used to come in off the sea and do a quick run over and drop the bombs and out again. And quite often we spent quite a bit of time in the shelters at the school, I remember. We were taken out into the shelter on the playing field at the back of the school. So presumably that was when air raids were taking place. But I don't say I think we were one of the few people who were bombed out actually during the war. Apart from when they dropped bombs on Victoria Road, I don't think there was any other major damage done to us at all. I do remember, when this was I don't know, my father taking me down to Golf Road where there was a German plane that had been shot down, and it was, I think it was the army was standing guard over it, and I remember my dad taking me to see that.
I do remember the day war broke out. I'd been in hospital, I had scarlet fever, and I was sent to the isolation hospital. While I was there, my parents went to North Wales, and they promised that when I came out they'd take me there. But it happened that war broke out the day we were due to go, so I didn't get to North Wales till long after the war. My father was a butcher, and my mother helped him in the shop during the war because he was also an auxiliary fireman. When the war first broke out, the cellar in our shop had the freezers, the fridges in. So we used to go to the shop next door into their cellar when there was an air raid. And I remember my brother was a baby and the next door neighbour had a baby. And I remember them being put on a shelf in the gas masks that you put the whole baby in. I remember that very clearly. We moved, went to live in a house, and the first shelter we had was the reinforced table in the dining room, and then we had an air raid shelter in the back garden.
Did you ever use the air raid shelter in the garden?
Yes, quite often I think. I liked that, it smelled funny. And I also got very excited about getting up in the middle of the night.
When you were in Leicester, did Leicester suffer any bomb damage?
Yes, it did. I used to go to night school in Leicester, and we came out of this. It was a big college. My friend and I, we lived not too near, but on the way home we were together. And I says to her, "Look there," says, that sky's a bit red. So she said, "Oh, it's all right. Come on." Anyway, I left this girl. She went her way, and I went mine. When I got near home, he dropped some bombs, and it just as though they were dropping them after me, you know. When I got home, my mother wasn't there. She'd gone to the school, to the warden's place, you know, where they used to go, and I had to go and look for her. And she sat at the top of the stairs crying. She said, "I can't go down there, it was full of people." But anyway, they all clear went. And then we went home, I took her home, and I heard that there was a landmine had dropped. So I went round to see where this landmine was, and there was a great big hole in the road, and some young girl came round the corner, and she looked and she collapsed, and then the whole of her house had gone, family and everything.
My name is Margaret Ottaway, and I've lived in Louth in Lincolnshire for all my life, except 1 year when I lived in Alford. As I say, our family, extended family, spent a lot of time over in our house, and on a Sunday, September the 7th, 1941, the family from Grimsby had contacted my mother and father to say they were coming over for tea. In the household, in the top of Louth, it was a semi-detached house, there was an air raid shelter, but we'd apparently had tea. And then the 3 children, that's myself, who was 7, and my cousin Jeannie, and obviously my 5-year-old sister, we were all put to bed downstairs in the front room. That's what you did. My brother John, who was 13 at the time, was still upstairs. There were too many of us in the house, I assume, not to go into the air raid shelter, because I can remember my dad taking my sister Mary and I to show us in the air raid shelter, and I can remember distinctly a little wooden cupboard which had emergency rations in, and that cupboard survived the war because I used it you know, during my life, and I just feel sad that there were because there were too many people, and you wouldn't pick out a few children and put them in there on their own in the middle of the night. My auntie and my uncle, etc., they were going to go home, and during the evening, and I'm not quite sure what time, the siren went. So of course everybody battened down the hatches. it was the second incident for civilians, when civilians were killed in the town, both in 1941. My recollection of it is that I was trapped in rubble, and I woke up. I couldn't think what had happened to me at the top of Grimsby Road, number 34 it was. I really couldn't understand what had happened to me, and I can remember hearing a pneumatic drill, and I can remember I couldn't move because of the gravel. I could feel the gravel around me all over. So I don't know how deep I was buried, but I suspect it must have been with the collapse of the building, because I have a picture of the building after this happened, but I think they would probably take away the excess rubble, because according to what I understand, my brother was upstairs and I suspect the floor would give way because it was a high velocity bomb in the back of the house, the side door, and then the other bomb dropped in the field, which was Howard's farm. They were both jettisoned, well, not at the same time probably, but within seconds. So my brother does recall that, and he was taken to, I don't know what it's called, but the Red Cross ran these places where you were sent. I've never actually found out where it was, but I think it could have been in Mercer Row, opposite the King's Head in Louth. But I can remember being taken in there, and I can't remember how I got from the house down to the place, but I can remember being fed with like a teapot without a lid, of which I've got copies of at my home. And I can always remember the atmosphere when a stretcher was carried through, and I'm convinced, because of the atmosphere, that was our mother. But of course, it's after the event that you feel these things, but I can definitely remember that.
My name is Rosemary Dorricott. I was a little girl in the war. I was 6 years old when the war broke out, and we had to put blackouts up, curtains up, to make sure that everything was, no light was showing. And during the war, I went to school in Skegness, eventually to Skegness Grammar School. And Skegness was the home of the Navy, because they were at Butlin's holiday camp, which has been turned into a training camp for sailors. There were all nationalities there. So it was a very good target for the enemy. So we got quite a few raids. One particular day, my mother had to go into town, and she left my sister and I, who was older than I was, with a friend while she went. Well, of course, the sirens went while she was out, and we were left there worrying our hearts out what would happen to her. And when we eventually, the all clear went, my mother came down the road on a bicycle, as if nothing had happened, not a care in the world. Then when she came home, she said that while the air raid was on, she dived under the nearest hedge, and a little old lady had done the same thing. And when the raid was over, the old lady had lost her shoes and she couldn't find them anywhere. They'd been blown completely off her feet. So that was a funny aspect of the war. Lots of sad and tragic things happened. I lost 2 friends during the war through bombing. One was a little boy aged 7 years old, little Barry Evans. And he was my very, very dearest little friend. And I really loved him. He was really lovely. And I sat next to him at school. That was when I was in the infant school, in the junior school. And he was there one day, and the next day he wasn't at school. And a bomb had completely demolished his house, and his family were killed. And that was the first sad thing I knew of the war. The next thing was when I was at grammar school. I was about a 2nd year, and the girl in about 3rd, 4th year I knew quite well. They lived on a farm, and one of the crippled Lancs landed on their farm, and the whole family and the crew were killed. That was another tragic thing that happened in the war.
That certain night, the night we met, there was magic abroad in the air. There were angels dining at the Ritz, and a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm perfectly willing to swear that when you turned and smiled at me, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. The moon that lingered over London town, that poor puzzled moon, he wore a frown. How could he know we two were so in love? This whole dark world seemed upside down. The streets of town were paved with stars. It was such a romantic affair, and as we kissed them, said goodnight, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. The dawn came stealing up all gold and blue to interrupt our rendezvous. I still remember how you smiled and said, was that a dream? Oh, was it true? Our homeward step was just as light as the dancing feet of a stair, and like an echo far away, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I know 'cause I was there that night in Berkeley Square.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Forces and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command.
After the Premier had repeated his announcement to the House of Commons, the Speaker led a procession of members, headed by Mr. Churchill and Mr. Greenwood, across to St. Margaret's, for a victory Thanksgiving service. Meanwhile, of course, Londoners had begun their non-stop two-day celebration. The end of the German war had come 11 months after the landings in Normandy. V-Day came less than a year after D-Day. But it was the end of nearly 6 years of war in Europe.
After the war, I remember VE Day, and that was when I was just turned 12, and we all went to the front on that particular day and met. And on the parade cinema at Skegness front, there was a whole lot of sailors from HMS Royal Arthur, and there was one lone sailor that sang "We'll Meet Again" in the lovely May, lovely still night, and it was beautiful, and there wasn't a dry eye anywhere, as you can imagine. It was beautiful.
We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day. Keep smiling through, just like you always do.
Long live the cause of freedom. God save the King.
Today, we give thanks to God for a great deliverance. Speaking from our empire's oldest capital city, war battered, but never for one moment daunted or dismayed. The enemy, who drove all Europe into war, has been finally overcome. The Queen and I know that the ordeals which you have endured throughout the Commonwealth and Empire. We are proud to have shared some of them with you. And we know also that we shall all face the future together.